because I often forget to do that. Let's see, we need to keep time. Okay. So we have an hour. So let's do 4-minute turns.
I can keep time if you want.
Okay.
For the
You
4
want
minutes.
to do that? Okay.
Sure.
All right. Thanks. We'll wait for Crystal to
Welcome.
come back. Okay, so we're going to do 4-minute turns since we only have an hour, and we're going, and Violetta's going to keep time. And our topic is how do you define empathy, and how does your definition map onto what's happening in the empathy circle? Who would like to go first?
I'm happy
Okay,
to
thanks,
go.
Wendy. Go ahead.
So do I choose a listener?
Mhm.
Yeah, okay. Crystal, may I choose you as a listener?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. So how do I define empathy at the moment? Currently, I define empathy as the capacity to attune to share, and to be appropriately responsive to other people.
So you currently define empathy as a way to share and to be appropriate to others.
No, to appropriately responsive.
Okay. To be appropriately responsive. Thank you.
To attune to them, to be in tune. And actually, I suppose it's interesting when I say others, then I was thinking, no, it's not just other people, it's also empathy with the forest, you know, the rivers, the dogs, the cats, it's everything. It's not just, so empathy isn't just about other people. And in terms of hi Priyanka. Yeah, in terms of how it maps onto the empathy circle, it maps in every role, I think, in terms of, especially, of course, when it's the speaker and the listener, but the silent listener especially too.
Yeah, so you're reflecting how empathy also is nature, and it is prevalent in all the roles that we have a way of being, whether it's the role of the speaker, the listener, or the active listener, right?
I think in some ways, when I think about mapping my definition onto each of the roles in the empathy circle process, it's very easy to focus on the speaker and the active listener. I actually notice the empathy arising or declining in the role of silent listener much more.
Yeah, and you're reflecting how the silent listener, forgive me, that you can sense that increase you said incline and decline, that increase or decrease of empathy. You can see it in the silent listener.
Because when I'm a speaker, I'm focusing on what I'm communicating. If I'm the listener, I'm listening really hard in order to get the essence. Whereas as the silent listener, it feels more pervasive, and I can feel if boredom is coming up and I want to, you know, look at my email. I can feel if, wow, what this person's saying really resonates. So yeah.
Yeah, so you're reflecting how when you're the silent listener, you can be more present and aware of your own senses when you're not speaking or having to reflect. But that role leads to more awareness.
And as the silent listener, I get to to notice the things that connect and that I feel responsive to much more.
And you're reflecting how, as the silent listener, you can be more present and aware of yourself and what you're listening to and how you're responding, reacting internally. Yes.
Thank you so much, Crystal. I feel fully heard.
Thank you. Priyanka, would you be my listener?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you for coming back. I love what Wendy said. I have spent a lifetime not using my voice and really being silent and practicing what Wendy just reflected in observing and recognizing from observing what comes up in me when I'm watching a speaker and a listener.
So you really liked what Wendy said about being a silent listener, and you spent your lifetime just being silent, not raising your voice, and just observing what's happening.
Mm. Well, I wouldn't say my whole lifetime, but certainly it's a learned behavior. It's a roadmap in my brain that from conflict as an early child, that was my way of being in the world, was to be the silent listener.
So yeah, that was your way of being in the world in general, was being a silent listener from which you learned from your childhood.
Yeah. And I think it speaks to the 3 different paths that we can look at for people who come into the empathy circle and they're trying to find their way of being to elevate themselves and others, whether you're the protagonist or antagonist in the story.
Yeah, so it's like it shows 3 different parts of the story, whether you're the protagonist or the antagonist, you can choose the path.
Well, I mean, it sort of is from your childhood, the path is kind of set for you in terms of, I mean, I do believe some of us are born empaths, and I believe I was born an empath, but that's a belief system, and that's not what we're here talking about. We're here talking about growing empathy. I do think that things happen in our childhood that then determine our empathy path.
Yeah, so things happen in our childhood that determine our empathy path. And you think that there are some people who are born empaths, but it's not what you want to discuss here.
Yeah. And so what I do want to share is that for me, what I learned to do, and as I've been reflecting on this, I didn't even realize it was a gift. It was just my way of being in the world, is that it's really about being human first when you are starting to see judgment and conflict.
Yeah, it's about being human first when you start to see judgment and conflict.
Yeah. And, when Lou's point earlier about not educating people on I think biases that are 85%, 90%, many studies show that 90% of what we do is just hardwired. It's our instinctive reactions.
Yeah, 90% of what we do is just hardwired and instinctive.
Yeah. And so if we don't tell people the blocks, and if we don't tell people and educate them, then they aren't going to be able to do what Wendy shared, is an exercise of when there are the silent listener, of being aware what's coming up for them. Some people don't have that sense yet.
Yeah, some people don't have that sense of what's coming up for them. And so it's important that we educate them about the blocks.
Yeah. And just to quickly tell you that I have 5 steps that I took as a child as I've really thought back over this. The first step is that I'm always present and aware. Is there a conflict about to happen? So for me, in talking to Dwayne, we've now put be aware as the first step. Be aware. And then the second step is to be kind. When you see conflict, to be kind. The third step is to be curious when you see conflict, to ask questions. The fourth step is to be trustworthy. And that's really important. And the fifth step is to be a team player and realign yourself with what is the mission. And that's also personalized. So
yeah, so you have this 5-step process. The first one is be aware, trust. Third one was
Yeah.
What was the third one?
I should have paused, but I knew I was running out of time. So my apology. So it was be aware, be kind,
Be kind,
be curious,
trust, be
be
curious,
curious, and be trustworthy.
be trustworthy, and
Be a team
take
player.
part in the group.
Be a team
Yeah.
player. Yeah. Thank
Be a
you.
team player.
Yeah.
Thank you, Crystal. Violetta, would you be willing to listen to me?
Of course.
Yeah. My definition of empathy is actually being able to share, even if I'm going through something ugly and people don't want to be around it, and people, like what I share today, nobody wants to hear it, nobody wants to be a part of it. That's my judgment of people, but I want to share it because that was what is alive in me at that moment.
So for you, empathy means having the opportunity to share whatever is alive in you, even if it's unpleasant for the listener.
Yeah. And, I've been practicing nonviolent communication, and Marshall Rosenberg, he says, you should share whatever's alive in you, even if nobody on earth wants to hear it, because that's a way of showing integrity to yourself.
So Rosenberg in the nonviolent communication talks about this idea of being able to share what's alive in you, because that, even if no one on earth at all wants to hear it, because that's how you keep integrity to yourself.
So I think empathy in the first place, to me, it means integrity.
So you see empathy firstly as integrity.
Yeah. And if what I'm going through is anger and resentment, I don't want to be sitting there and pretending that everything is okay in any situation.
So you're connecting that to anger and resentment, and you don't want to pretend that everything's okay when that's not true.
Yeah. I want to share whatever is in me, even if it's ugly and horrible and disgusting.
So empathy for you means this ability and space to share even the ugly and the disgusting parts of you, or whatever else is there and alive.
And when I do that, a question does arise in me: is it being empathic to the person that I'm expressing this to?
So you're wondering if you are being empathic when you're expressing whatever is within you, what is alive for you. Is it empathic to them when you're expressing it?
I don't know the answer to that. But I think I owe myself the first responsibilities to myself. And I take responsibility for my feelings, and I take responsibility for expressing them. And if people outside don't want to be around it, they can take the responsibility to leave.
So you're going back to that integrity to yourself, and you find that as a priority value for you, that you see that as a first responsibility. I'm responsible for my own feelings and statements, and the person that's receiving them is responsible for their feelings and statements and actions.
Yeah. So this idea that, which Marshall also says, that no one can ever hurt you because you are responsible for yourself. So at most, what somebody else can do is to trigger your feelings, but you are ultimately responsible for your own feelings. We should do that in order to have that integrity.
So continuing the integrity topic, Marshall Rosenberg makes this kind of bold claim that nobody could really hurt you. It's the most they could do is to trigger things that you are allowing, and you become responsible for your own hurt.
Yeah. And growing up a lot, often guilt was used against me when I expressed my needs. And so I'm very sensitive to being shamed. And if someone tries to shame me, I express myself more. That's my integrity and promise to myself. And I think that's self-empathy.
So your topic is self-empathy, and you're going back to that self-empathy because ever since you've been growing up, this expressing yourself has been attacked and shamed. So you find this responsibility for yourself, that first value, to show integrity to yourself, is to never allow that to happen.
Thank you, Violetta.
Lou, would you mind listening to me?
Yes, listening.
So there's a lot of conversations going on today, kind of parallel to one another. I will try to stick to the question, what is my definition of empathy and how I see it played out in the empathy circle. And I will be very classically Rogerian in my definition, so there will be no surprise. I see empathy as perceiving and experiencing the world and the felt experiences of the other as if I am the other, but without losing the as if condition. So I know I'm.
Yeah, so you're acknowledging that you perceive a lot of different conversations going on in the circle, but you want to focus on the question that was being asked, which is, what is empathy and how does it happen in the circle? And you're very Rogerian in your definition, which is that you think it's sensing into what's going on in the other person without losing yourself.
Correct. Mapping it onto the circle. I'm not sure. I think it's just so obvious to me that it's kind of difficult to explain it. Probably the most empathic moment of the circle would be I feel heard, when the speaker acknowledges that they have truly been heard. And I see that probably as the crucial moment from that definition being played out.
Yeah, so when you think about how does the definition that you hold, how does that show up in the empathy circle, it was hard for you to think about that, and then you said, I think that when the speaker says, I feel heard, you think that's the clearest expression of empathy.
Yeah, that's it in a very short version. Thank you. I feel fully heard.
Okay. I'll speak to Wendy. Yeah, so I agree with Violetta's definition. I align very much with that definition of empathy. I also feel pretty strongly about the nonviolent communication definition of empathy, which is that it's sensing a person's feelings and the meaning or the needs, and reflecting that, well, sensing that in them. I'll stop there.
You agree very much with Violetta's definition, the Rogerian definition, and also the nonviolent communication definition of sensing into the needs of others.
Yeah, and I would say that I think sensing into another person, kind of what that means to me, the components of it are understanding their thinking and their feelings and and the meaning it has for them, or what needs are met or not met by it.
So sensing, you sharing that sensing for you means really sensing the thinking, the feelings of the other person, and really sharing that.
And that not just the feeling and the thinking, but the meaning also, or the needs that are met or not met.
So it's not just not just sensing the thinking and the feeling, it's the meaning behind the feelings and the thinking that you're resonating with.
Yeah, and I think of the meaning as being why it's important to them. And the reason it would be important to them is because certain needs are being met or not met.
So you're reflecting that the reason meaning is important is because certain needs are being met that are important to the person. So it's really important for you to understand the meaning in order to empathize.
Yeah, and I think the way it maps onto the circle is that, it's the job of the reflector to sense those things and to reflect them back to the speaker. And it's the role of the silent listeners to do the same sensing, but to just reflect it back silently. And it's the role of the facilitator to do the same thing and intervene if they need to. So I think, in an ideal circle, everyone's being empathic with the speaker.
So you're sharing that the way you see your definition of empathy mapping onto the circle is that each person, whether it's the speaker, the active listener, or the silent listener, they are reflecting and being empathetic to what the speaker is saying, and in particular the role of the facilitator is to do that and bring things back on track if need be.
Right, and it's the role of the reflector to actually express the empathy in words. Yeah.
So the role of the active listener, the reflector, is to reflect in words the empathy.
Right. I also think that participants come into the circle with different levels of capacity to access their empathy. And I think safety, creating safety in the circle, is the best way to help people begin to access their empathy.
Thank you. So you're sharing that people come into the circle with different levels of capacity, and the best way to create the empathy for them in that circle is a sense of safety. So safety is very important.
Yeah, and it's not so much that it creates empathy for them as that the safety helps people relax and begin to access their empathy. I think empathy is something people have. I think it's natural.
So the value of the safety in a circle is that allows people to relax and therefore to really sense their empathy much more.
Yeah, thanks. I feel heard.
Thank you, Lou. Violetta, would you listen?
Of course.
Thank you. Wow, aren't we lucky? I feel really fortunate to have so many different nuances and seeing the similarities as well as maybe some differences.
It's such a treasure to be together and have so many different views on empathy, and some similarities, some differences.
So one thing that comes to mind is this word that's being used, sensing into. I'm wondering what that really means, sensing into what's going on in others without losing a sense of self. What does that sensing mean?
So something that first kind of stands out to you is the expression sensing into the other without losing yourself. What does it really mean?
Sensing into it implies embodiment. It implies, for me, it's my whole body. It's not just as Lou was sharing, it's not just the thinking, the feeling. It's a sense of the whole body and empathizing.
It presumes embodiment, so it's not just thinking or feeling kind of abstract concepts, but the whole body is participating as we're sensing into the other.
And I think what I've noticed is that, and it's cropped up in some empathy circles, is almost, in fact, I'm wondering if it was even Crystal who said it it was this performance anxiety. I don't know if it was another circle, and how that maybe that sense of, well, I've got to listen and reflect, and even so just wondering how much that is inhibiting genuine sensing into others.
So you're kind of connecting the sensing into process with the performance anxiety when you have to reflect. How well are you doing it, and whether that anxiety is maybe suppressing partially that sensing into.
Mm. Yeah, I think when I'm thinking about mapping a definition onto the empathy circle, it really depends on how well people know each other in the empathy circle, because I feel it's very different when I'm in empathy circle. Each week we meet, we know each other. There's, like Lou was saying, this sense of trust, or this sense of safety. And I think it's quite different when it's people who maybe only met once or never met before.
So as you're thinking of mapping that onto the empathy circle, it occurs to you that the safety that Lou was talking about is happening a lot easier in a place where we get to know one another, we meet weekly, compared to a completely new group of people.
Yeah, in terms of definition, again, I'm really intrigued by the connection between empathy and compassion, and how, Jana mentioned at the beginning that maybe, Venerable Rabina had said, oh, well, they're the same thing. Yeah, I thank you. I'm really aware of, are they the same? Are they different? Why are they different?
In terms of definition, you haven't quite arrived at a final answer yet, but you're very intrigued by the connection between empathy and compassion. Are they the same? Are they different? If they are different, how exactly do they differ?
Thank you, Violetta. I feel very heard.
Thank you. Crystal, would you be so kind to be my listener?
Yes, thank you.
For me, probably this sensing into portion of empathy is also the key part that I find as the core of my definition of empathy. Obviously, I'm borrowing almost word for word from Carl Rogers, but I do think that sensing into is the core.
So you're reflecting how you're borrowing the definition from Carl Rogers, but that you really believe firmly that it's rooted in the sensing into concept.
That has been the question I've tried to answer to myself in the last maybe 6 years of thinking and writing.
And how in the last 6 years of thinking and writing, that's a question that you continue to ask yourself.
So I have, I'm going to surprise everybody probably by saying that I've arrived at the conclusion that this is the role of imagination.
And your conclusion that you think will surprise everyone is that you think that it's the role of imagination.
I don't think imagination is something that happens kind of abstractly in my mind, but it's my body really experiencing as if it is put in those different shoes, so to speak.
Yeah, so you're speaking to, it's your body's way of reacting to your mind actually stepping into someone else's shoes.
I think I see imagination as reenactment rather than fantasy. Maybe that's the word that helps.
So reenactment is the word that you're thinking of rather than fantasy in terms of defining empathy.
Mm-hmm. And that's all the thoughts I have at this point. Thank you, Crystal. I feel fully heard.
Okay. Did we lose Priyanka?
Apparently.
Lou, would you be my
It could
listener?
be sorry, it could be her internet. It sometimes goes off.
Yeah, it's very late there. It's amazing.
Yes,
She's present.
I'm happy to be your listener.
Thank you. Yeah, there's so many different ways this conversation's going. I come back to what I know to be true, that we are social creatures who are wired for belonging, meaning, and purpose.
Yeah, so for you, the conversation's going in a lot of different directions, and what you come back to is what you believe is true, which is that we're wired for meaning, purpose, and something else.
Belonging,
Belonging, right? Belonging, meaning, and purpose.
the I in DEI. Inclusion is such an important component, as Violetta and as we've all spoken to. And for me, that's really to have empathy, you have to embody that way of being, of choosing with intention to create an environment of safety, psychological safety, and that you choose to welcome. I'm going to pause there.
Yeah, so you're saying that inclusion is very, very important, and that in order to be inclusive, you have to intentionally create a safe environment that welcomes people.
It's not the person, because I think so often we are triggered in our 85%, 90% of decisions, that when I look at you and I judge you based on the color of your skin or your glasses or your age or your weight, all of those things get stuck. So we have to intentionally come to the table without judgment and choose to welcome, celebrate, and cherish not the person. It's the human potential for me in that person.
Yeah, so you're aware that when you look at someone, or there's all these things that go on, all the things you notice about them, and that because you have all of that going on, you make a deliberate decision to set those things aside and to just see the humanity in the person.
Right. And I define humanity as human potential. So that's a beautiful segue. And so for me, in coming back to where all of this maps in, empathy, it is just a personal process of meeting people wherever they are, as Priyanka beautifully illustrated today. Yeah.
So for you, empathy really means just meeting people where they are. And you thought what Priyanka did today at the beginning of the session was a good example of that.
Yeah. And to be able to take that further, I think that when each of us can circle our story back to our origin of empathy, and when we can share that inspires others to find their narrative and where did their empathy story begin, so that they can find that record. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think you're saying that when people are self-aware and they express themselves authentically, that inspires others to do that as well, and that you think that's a good thing.
Yeah, thank you. And I just think that's important in this whole process, to when people are coming in, to maybe even have like a some type of, I won't call it test, but self-awareness check-in, so that we know where people are. Yeah.
So you think maybe it would be a good idea to have some kind of self-awareness check-in for people that come into circles, so that we, I guess meaning you, have some idea where they are.
With their blocks and on the path, and these 3 paths. I think people, just one other thing, and just, we are all rooted in logos, ethos, and pathos, some of us stronger in one than the other. And that would help us understand how we can put people in groups to help grow empathy. Yeah.
So in your understanding, there are people who are in different groups, and that you think maybe separating people who are in different stages into
Mhm.
groups, that would be helpful.
Thank you. I'm still processing it, so it's me talking while I'm thinking. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so I'll talk to Wendy. Um, so many different things I could talk about. Okay, so I want to comment on what Violetta said about imagination. So I think so for myself, I would draw a distinction between times when I'm listening to someone and I resonate a lot with what they're saying. And so I actually feel like I um, uh, easily feel into what they are experiencing, and I can understand it and repeat it back to them. And other times when I can't really actually relate to much of what they're saying, doesn't really match my own experience very much. And so I have to kind of imagine myself being in their shoes if I want to connect with some feeling about what they're saying. And I would call the second thing imagination. I would call the first thing resonance or something like that.
So you shared that there's a lot of things that you could have focused on, and you wanted specifically now to talk about Violetta's sharing about imagination, imaginative empathy, and you feel that there are sort of two ways that can be explored, in the sense that there's somebody you can listen to and totally relate to and feel on the same wavelength with, and you don't feel that is imagination. Whereas the second maybe type of empathy situation is one when you can't really relate to them on a personal level, you can't relate to their stories, and so for you that's when your imagination comes in to enable you to then empathize.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I just want to say that in each of those things, I was describing my personal experience. I wasn't saying we or that it wasn't a theory. I was just saying how it is for me. And then the other thing I want to say, though, about what Violetta said is I'm very conscious of that whatever I think I'm experiencing that the other person is experiencing, I'm very aware that I have no idea what's going on in the other person. And if that's what she means by, that it's imagination, because I am imagining that's what's going on in them, but I don't know. There's no way for me to really know. I also agree with that.
So you clarified that when you had those two groups, it's very much how you experience it. You're not saying that it's for everyone that way. And you're also very aware that you can never really know whether you are empathizing with someone. You can't really imagine, you can't 100% guarantee that what you're thinking they're thinking is what they're thinking. So you're wondering if that is what Violetta means by imagination.
Yeah, and I wouldn't just say thinking, I would say experiencing what they're experiencing, which involves all the things I talked about. Yeah.
So not just thinking, but actually experiencing, which
Yeah.
involves much more.
Yeah. And I would say, oh, okay. Okay, I'm done. Thank you. I feel heard.
Feel free if you.
Well, the one more thing I was going to say was what you said about embodiment. The things that I described before about thinking, feelings, and meaning, I would say I experience those in my body as well. I articulate it with words, but I think I experience it intellectually and in my heart and in my body. It happens in all three places for me.
You wanted to clarify that in relation to dimension of embodiment, that when you're thinking, feeling, and finding meaning, that you feel in your body. So it's a visceral experience, not just a head thing.
Yes, thanks. I feel heard.
Crystal, would you listen, please?
Sure, thank you.
So, just need to take a minute to. Yeah, so I was mentioning how what intrigues me is this overlap between empathy and compassion, and how Edwin mentioned in one of the circles how for him compassion is just something that people experience when there is suffering, whereas empathy is something that is there whatever the emotion.
So you're thinking back to how Edwin shared that compassion is something that we can express only when people are suffering, whereas empathy is something that we express in all situations.
Empathy is something that whatever the emotions, whether it's sad or happy or jealous or angry or joyful, whatever the emotion, Edwin is suggesting that there can be empathy.
Yeah, so it's the whole human experience. Any emotion is relatable with the word empathy.
Whereas I can resonate with that, but to me, compassion is actually taking an active step to do something about a situation.
Right, and how empathy differs from compassion, in that compassion elicits an action.
Yeah, mental or physical compassion, to my mind, is actually empathy is the basis. I have empathy for a worm that's on the road and is about to get squashed by the car. Then compassion is that idea of picking the worm up and taking it to the side of the road.
Yeah, so you're using a beautiful story of a worm on the side of the road, and how empathy would not lead to the action. Well, okay, that's not what you said. Compassion would lead to the action of picking up the worm and removing it and taking it to the side of the road, whereas empathy might stop short of that.
I'm also aware of not wanting to get into semantics with any of these things. So, yeah.
So you're aware of the semantics and how we can play with words and get stuck with each other in words.
Yeah. So, yes, to relate to Violetta and Lou's comments on imagination and that idea that it's reenactment. Imagination is reenactment. Okay, you need to think about that.
So you're reflecting back on Lou and Violetta's comments earlier about imagination and how you're going to reflect on that and what that means.
So I suppose I'm trying to reenactment. So I reenact with my mind what I feel somebody has said, or I don't understand.
Yeah, so you're demonstrating that you're struggling physically and mentally with comprehending that whole process of reenactment.
Thank you. I feel fully heard. Thank you.
So this is actually something that I'm concerned about, that you guys are raising, this whole process of imaginative. Oh, I'm sorry, Lou, if you could be my listener. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I immediately, yeah.
Yeah, so you're very energized about the topic and ready to speak about it.
Well, it's something that I was actually going to reach out to Violetta in private about. There's a small population, and I did, when I spoke with her not last week, but the week before in an empathy circle, raised my concern about this small population of people that have head injuries. We think it's 10%, we don't know, and what learning empathy means for them.
Yeah, so you have a concern about a small percentage of people who have had, I think you said head injuries and or something, and then maybe they can't learn empathy.
Right. And when they can learn to model these skills, they can easily become enmeshed in relationships with people who are codependent and who have enormous amounts of empathy. And um, I wish the medical community was doing more for people who had head injuries so that we could understand how to help them, because I don't think teaching them empathy is the answer.
Yeah, so you're concerned about people who have head injuries getting enmeshed with people who are codependent, and you wish that the medical community would put more attention on how to help people with head injuries, and you don't think teaching them empathy is.
Yeah. Because I think we're referring back to Wendy and this definition of empathy. You know, we're playing semantics. Like, I don't like judging and putting like sociopath and other words that really demonstrate a mental health issue on someone. And how do we help them? And this is one of my concerns with role playing and imaginative empathy, and what it means for the people in the world who are in relationships with that population. And this is really something that it's really concerning for me. Yeah.
Yeah, so you are very concerned about people who have head injuries, and rather than diagnosing them and giving them labels, you're wondering about how to help them, and
Yeah.
you should be focused on that.
And I don't think teaching them empathy is the answer. And it's just something I'm worried about. So,
And you don't think teaching them how to be empathic is the answer.
no, no, thank you. I feel fully heard.
Okay. I'll speak to Violetta.
course.
Yeah. What do I want to say? So I'm really curious because this has been Violetta's area of research, and she knows a lot about it. And I tend to, so I have a tendency to believe that empathy is that we're wired for empathy, that that's a natural capacity in human beings. And so when I think about helping people to connect with their natural capacity for empathy rather than teaching them empathy. Um, and so it has to do with like opening or uh, allowing. Um, uh, yeah, and yeah, I'll stop there. But I'm wondering if that's true. I'm wondering if that's accurate. What my belief is there.
So you're now wondering about my thoughts on it, and maybe on what Crystal shared as well, since this is my area of expertise. But it is an empathy circle, so you're talking what your viewpoint was about teaching empathy, kind of continuing what Crystal was talking about, people with traumatic brain injuries and how that would affect their empathic skills to a point where teaching them empathy is not helpful. You don't think of empathy as being taught, but rather as an inborn. We're wired for empathy. So probably maybe skill is not the right word. An ability that's just needs to be provided safety for, and then it just grows by itself. It's so natural to us that in most cases it's more has obstacles in front of it rather than needs a special nourishment or training to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like language. We're naturally wired to develop language. Human beings communicate. And if a human being grows up in an environment where talking happens and what they're saying is reflected, they will learn language. And the same happens with empathy and feelings. I think if you're not in an empathic environment and your empathic capacity is not acknowledged, welcomed, uh, then you lose it, or it atrophies.
And you're comparing that to language. If a child grows up in a very language-rich environment, then and if their feelings are reflected with words, it just naturally for them, they grow up to be empathic and able to give those words to other people, other people's feelings and experiences. And it's a similar thing with empathy. If they're in an environment that's harsh, unsafe, that's not responding to their feelings and is not mirroring them accurately, they just don't know how to do it. They will not develop that.
Yeah, it's interesting hearing you reflecting that back to me. What I'm reflecting on is, so there is some teaching that goes on. It isn't as though there's no teaching. It has to do with developing a cognitive understanding of your biological experience. And if you have that, then you can articulate it with words. If you don't have it, you still experience it. You just don't know what to call it. You don't know how to talk about it. And your capacity to make yourself understood to others is less.
So we're going back to the kind of mind-body conversation as well, and that teaching empathy does play a role by giving you language, giving us all language and words about what are the things that are happening within you.
Mm-hmm.
And if you never have that language of expression, then you still have the things happen, but they don't grow as much and they just don't get experience. They don't have a way out.
Or you don't have a way to make yourself understood. Very well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Thanks, I feel heard.
Okay. Wendy, would you mind listening to me, please? So many questions. So some of the questions I hear, the teacher in me wakes up, are what are the different influences on empathy, starting from biological influences, social influences. What is the nature nurture conversation in?
Yeah, we have a minute left.
Oh, okay, that's what it means. Okay. Well,
I'll just reflect back before that. So you're reflecting on the influences on us, biological, sociological, etc.
On empathy, yes. So we specifically talked about a biological influence, which would be a TBI, and we talked about kind of environmental influence that Lou talked about, which is upbringing, kind of emotional climate in the family.
Yes, so you're reflecting on the environmental influences on empathy and TBI, and
we have 10 seconds left.
Yeah. Oh.
Sorry, I didn't manage to time at the end better.
What we all care about is the freedom of the agency. Could I choose to be empathetic or not? And what is that?
Oh, you decide. And if you decide, it's okay, Peter Pan.
Okay, I think we're all back. So in the actual session 1, we'd be doing an empathy circle. I haven't figured out yet what we would do when we come back. Maybe it'd be sort of a debrief, just like any learnings that you had or any comments about the circle, and we can just go around and hear from everyone about that. Lou, do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, I think the most meaningful thing that happened for me in the circle is reflecting on teaching the balance between empathy being natural, being something we're wired for, and teaching. Is there teaching that is involved in people being empathic, and what is the relationship between those two things? So I'm thinking about that more. Yeah.
Okay, Wendy?
Wow. Yeah, just what sensing into empathy really means, that whole phrase, sensing into, and its connection with embodiment. Thinking about really what imaginative empathy is, whether, different definitions of that. Yeah, there was a whole range of things. Thank you.
Okay, Violetta?
My thoughts are more kind of logistical, and how are we wrapping everybody's definition of empathy, and how do we arrive at some kind of closure? And I'm not quite sure.
Okay, Colin?
Today was a real experience for me in the breakout room, where I really had the opportunity to connect with this felt sense inside of me after what had happened in the main room, really connecting with what was going on in my body and being able to share that with others and have that reflected back to me was healing and kept me in the group, in the breakout room. Otherwise, I probably would have left. I wanted to leave. So I'm more convinced through this experience today that the empathy circle has a real power.
Okay, thanks, Colin. Kara?
I think what I got the most from all of this, confirmation of concept for me. I do a lot of emotional intelligence work with my work, and one of the things we say a lot is that just because someone else is right does not mean that you are wrong. And empathy is being able to, for me, create that space for that, so that somebody can be seen, be heard. You don't have to agree, like it, nothing. That they can have their feelings and have those seen, heard, and reflected, period. And the magic that creates on a person and in a relationship and in a group is just fantastic. That's why I'm here, y'all.
Great, thanks, Kara. Jana?
It was a precious opportunity to be part of this empathy circle. Thank you.
I'm glad you could make it, being in that environment there. So, Crystal?
Yeah, so my biggest takeaway today was confirmation that empathy is a personalized experience based on biological, sociological, all of these different factors, and how it's important when we're doing this to really map the customer. I mean, I use it because I'm in entrepreneurship, customer journey, but it's really the human journey. So forgive my faux pas there. And how it's important to perhaps do a self-analysis for those who are coming in to reflect where they are on the journey, and that might be something that you want to look at building in to the program.
Okay, DJ, we're just checking in. Oh, you had to restart your computer. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry about that. So we're just talking about what we got out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we had a really great circle. It was really good. I think that we all just kind of helped each other define empathy, and it really was enlightening for me because like Edwin explained to me, I was really talking about blocks to blocks of empathy. and how people get misrepresented and misinterpreted because they're bringing in all this subconscious or conscious stressors that are extraneous to the experience. Even if it's not an empathy circle, you're still having this empathetic way of being, right? And so it can happen inside or outside the circle. But I really liked what Edwin was saying and Kara was saying and Jana was saying. It was just really great. And Colin, of course, was amazing. We just, we really gelled as a group. And I think that we really looked at this whole issue of conflict. And I think we came out of the group really understanding how important it is to add this new dimension to empathy that has to do with being patient, and that it takes time. When there's a conflict that arises, it can't be swift. And Edwin said it's like a knot, and you're just untying the knot little by little, little by little. And I really like that. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone. So for me, we're kind of doing two levels. We're kind of doing sort of a prototype of the course, plus we're also sort of designing it as well. So it's kind of like two things going on at the same time. Our circle, I found we spent a lot of time just talking about, it was alive for us, from a little bit of the conflict and so forth, and just having a space to talk about that. I thought it was just really beautiful how it sort of unfolded, and so I thought that was really good. So in the course, so far with the outline, it'd be like a 30-minute sort of a debrief. And, we would go around just hearing from everyone. I'm not sure what else we would put into the end, but it's just something to kind of think about. I don't know if anybody has, we could just do one quick round of any suggestions. Like, we've gone through the intro section. We've gone through the breakout rooms. Everyone's talked about their definition of empathy and how it relates to empathy circles. And, the conversation will probably go all over the place, which it always does, because it's bringing up what's alive for people. So any ideas about what to do in the last 30 minutes besides sort of a check-in, a debrief? So, Lou?
Well, so we are saying that, what we're doing in the empathy circle is aligned with Roger's definition of empathy. And the purpose of the empathy circle is to have people explore, their own thinking about empathy and maybe how it relates to Roger's definition. So the closing might be something getting people reflect on how is your view of empathy? How does it match up with what we're calling Roger's view of empathy, to try to, get people to think about, so am I in alignment with what we are trying to do, or do I have a difference, or something like that.
Okay.
I'll just interject here because my thoughts are very connected to what Lou was saying. I was wondering if we could wrap it up in with the facets of the diamond, or maybe even have the break room discussions in this way. In this model, where do you find the definition of empathy, your definition of empathy, being mapped out, if that makes sense? So we kind of use that as an epistemological center, as this kind of claim to truth. Because the difference between saying what empathy feels like to me and saying what empathy is a conversation. One is about feelings, the other one is about truth. And these are different conversations. So when we have a training about defining empathy, we are working more with truth, and we're mapping it out in the empathy circle. Sorry. So that's my thought. And if we, because we take the diamond model as that epistemological center around which our whole discussion will stay. So I wonder whether in the closing debrief, or even early in the breakout rooms, we could say, now at the start of this training, where would you map, on which facet do you find yourself more glued to, I don't know. but-
Identifying with, or do you see that
Yeah.
that relates to
Mhm.
empathy for you?
Yeah.
Is it other-oriented, self-empathy,
Yeah.
imaginative empathy? Where do you sort of relate
Mhm.
to? Okay, cool. Crystal?
I just wanted to connect with what Lou and Violetta were saying, because we did discuss it in our circle. And Priyanka and I both went back to our story of origin, to where we related to our way of being in the present with our way of being as a child. And so to the extent that people can tell that story, that helps them understand also their blocks. And so I think that that would be a beautiful way for people to have a call to action at the end, to ponder their story before they come back to the next session.
So I'm not quite sure. So somehow share your story and think about how that relates for at the end. So you have sort of an assignment to, okay. Okay, Colin?
I like the diamond as a metaphor, and maybe making more use of that, and maybe asking a question at the end: what has become clear for you now? And using the analogy of polishing a diamond or cutting a diamond to have greater clarity. As simple as that, really. But I think that this metaphor of the diamond could be used more often. It's something that I, as a coach, connect with. I connect with visual imagery and with metaphors. It helps me to learn. So, yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
Is there anyone else? Yeah, go ahead, Wendy.
I really like everything that's been said so far, Colin, Crystal, Lou, you know, really relate. And I'm just wondering to connect that sense of a journey, you know, that it is a journey. It's not, okay, this might be your definition now. But thinking about that diamond, you know, what was your, you know, how did you think about empathy when you were 10, when you were 20, when you were 30, you know, how do you think you'll be thinking about it when you're 80? You know, it's this idea of a journey, that it's not static, and using the diamond, you know, to model that.
Okay, so, oh yeah, go ahead, Kara.
So I would reiterate everything everybody just said. I think that on the last bit of it, having something that is a continual tie-in, such as the diamond, is a really good, besides just a good training tactic, it's a really good way to map how our progress is in the training. And then I think the call to action, having something that gets them from here to the next place so that they're in preparation. I think both of those are incredibly impactful when it comes to training.
Okay, so we just have a few minutes left. So I had I just shared this. Hopefully that's coming up. You see the closing screen. So this is there'd be like a 5-minute at the end, you know, hear any trainer comments, review what we did in the session. So we reviewed the different things we covered, review what we'll do next, and mention next week's assignment. So next week, I guess we would say that we're doing other-oriented empathy. So that's the first part. And, you know, Lou, you're talking about Rogers. So that's really focusing on what Rogers' definition is next week. And the assignment was, well, there'd be like a feedback form. We would have empathy buddy calls too, just like we do with the other training. And then the assignments would be to read 2 articles by Rogers, which is The Empathic and Unappreciated Way of Being. There's a paper that he gave, as well as he narrated it. So he gave there's a video of him sharing, giving that paper. And then he also wrote a paper on active listening. So that would be 2 assignments to do for next week. And that would be what we will cover next week, is Roger's work talking about other oriented empathy. And I don't have a, a slideshow or anything for that together. So it's going to be a bit of just an empathy circle on other oriented empathy and on what we read from Rogers. So to really, start with his work. So any thoughts about that? Lou?
Actually, so that all sounds good. I mean, the fact that you're assigning them to read Rogers' papers before the next session means that this session is really more just about opening the topic of empathy and having people reflect on it, and the idea of bringing in Rogers' concept of empathy and kind of cementing that. That's not really happening this session. That's happening in the next session by reading the papers. So that's fine. So actually, the closing question you might ask in this session is how is your thinking about empathy shifted or enlarged by your experience today? Because the idea is we're really just calling in people's thinking about empathy and exploring it. We're not really trying to teach them about Rogers a lot. That's coming afterwards. I want to raise, I have a concern about Priyanka. So she came back into the room and she was in our breakout, and I think she had one speaking turn, maybe two, and then she dropped out. I don't know if she dropped out because she was needing something that was not happening in the circle for her, or if she had a technical problem or whatever. But I want to make sure that she's cared for. I mean, I think that she's got stuff. I think she's got a lot of feelings still about what happened in the big room, and I want to make sure that she is not just left alone with those feelings. So, do you plan to
Yeah, I'm going
contact
to
her,
reach
Edwin?
out to her. I'll be
Okay.
reaching out to her.
All right, and I'm happy to be involved. If you guys want to do some kind of restorative circle process or something like that, I'm happy to play a part in that. But I didn't want to use this session for that. So.
Great.
And I'm a little worried that she felt like I was dismissive of her because I said I didn't want to spend the session doing this. And so maybe I'll reach out to her myself also.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to reach out to. It's really late there. It's like midnight for
Yeah,
her. So
that's true. That's a
this
good
has
point.
been a time slot that's difficult for
Yeah.
Priyanka because of the time, and she
Yeah.
she also did a circle before this, and we went for 2 hours almost. So we're talking about going into 4 hours. So
yeah,
I have all kinds of stamina. When it comes to empathy circles, I want to do a marathon at some point, an 8-hour marathon. So yeah, you're on board, Kara. Great. So that's it. Next, I'll send out an email with the assignments. Next week, we'll probably just do an empathy circle about Rogers, that his other oriented empathy, which is often just called empathy, I think is what people are just calling empathy, is what, this other oriented empathy that, so we'll just pick up at that point. It's not very highly developed. Like I put a lot of time into this section to give the overall framework, because I think once we have the framework, we can slowly start fleshing out the individual sessions. So with that, I feel good. We're right on time. So thank you, everyone. Give your jazz hands a goodbye until next week. I hope you can make it, and see you then.
Bye, everyone.